Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into something fundamental. We're aiming to redefine what we even mean by knowledge. This isn't just, facts and figures. We are diving deep into Jnana. It's about this profound pursuit of true, really transformative wisdom.
That's right.
We've got quite the stack of sources here, ancient philosophical texts, modern commentaries. They're all kind of centered around Jnana Pancham, which is this day dedicated to, venerating knowledge.
Right.
So our mission today is to dissect this whole tradition, go way beyond the surface rituals, and tackle that big question: where does real wisdom actually live? And, maybe more importantly, why is just knowing something often way less critical than living it?
Yeah, and it's an exploration that honestly demands a certain intellectual honesty right from the start, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Because the tradition we're looking at, it just doesn't accept simple information as knowledge. It sets this incredibly high bar, almost startlingly high, for what makes someone a true knower, a jnani. And the sources, they give us this really powerful starting point, an analogy that kind of sums up the whole mission. It comes from Mahopathyaya Shivajaji Maharaj.
Okay, tell us about that. That distinction sounds like it really sets the scene for the kind of, purity we're aiming to understand here.
Yeah, it does. So the jnani, right, the person who's actually achieved this true knowledge, this wisdom, they're compared to a swan, a majestic swan, symbol of purity. And this swan, it grazes only on pearls in these super pristine, pure waters of Manasarovar. The whole image implies precision, discernment, sticking only to the absolute highest truth.
Wow. That really paints a picture, doesn't it? An elevated, almost rarefied kind of seeking for after only the rarest, most valuable stuff.
Exactly. Only the pearls. Now contrast that, and it's a stark contrast with the description of the ajnani, the ignorant person, the unenlightened one.
Okay.
They're likened pretty harshly, actually, to a pig rooting around in trash.
Oof, that's blunt.
It is. Or even worse, sometimes described as aggressively, like tearing up sacred knowledge, vidya. So the distinction couldn't be clearer. Your whole approach to getting knowledge, are you seeking pearls or just digging in the dirt? That defines your basic spiritual nature, your intention, its purity.
Got it.
And that's what we're here for today, right? To figure out how to actually acquire those pearls.
Okay, let's unpack this whole philosophical framework then. If we want those pearls, we definitely need the right tools, the right vocabulary, the structure. So step one has to be defined in Jnana, because in this tradition, it's not just one thing. It's categorized across this huge scale.
Right. We start with the 5 classical categories of Jnana. These basically map out the type and the scope of awareness any entity, any soul can possibly have.
Okay.
First up is Mati Jnana. This is your everyday sensory and intellectual knowledge. What we get through our 5 senses, our immediate thinking, this is hot, that is blue.
Basic perception and processing. Got it.
Then second, there's Shruta Jnana. This is scriptural knowledge, or more broadly, knowledge gained from hearing, from texts, from being taught.
Okay, those first 2 feel pretty familiar. Kind of the knowledge of the everyday world and the knowledge you get from studying or listening.
Yeah.
What about the others? They sound more exotic.
They definitely are. The remaining 3 describe these extraordinary states of knowing. Third is Avadi Jnana. Think of it as a kind of clairvoyance, maybe remote perception, seeing things beyond the normal senses.
Okay.
Fourth is Manaparyav Jnana. This is basically telepathy, the ability to directly know the thoughts of other beings.
Wow.
And finally, the ultimate one, Keval Jnana. This is absolute, perfect, all-encompassing knowledge, total omniscience, knowing everything.
That's just staggering, that range. From, I see this cup in front of me, all the way to, I know the entire past, present, and future of the whole universe.
It is a massive spectrum, but, and this is important, the sources immediately put this into context for us for our current time. They state very clearly that those last 3, Avadi, Manaparyav, and Keval Jnana, are, currently non-existent, or at least inaccessible to us in this particular era.
So we can't actually attain clairvoyance or omniscience right now?
Not according to these texts, no. So therefore, when we talk about the pursuit of knowledge, especially in the context of Jnana Pancham, we are overwhelmingly, almost exclusively, focused on cultivating Shruta Jnana. That knowledge gained through scriptures, through teaching, through careful listening.
Okay, that narrows it down significantly, but it brings us right to that foundational question, the one that really separates this philosophical path from, say, just academic study. If I'm pursuing Shruta Jnana, scriptural knowledge, where does that knowledge actually exist? Is it living in the physical book on my shelf, or is it somewhere else entirely?
And this point is absolutely paramount. The tradition gives an immediate, totally unyielding answer here. Jnan, knowledge is an inherent quality. It's a guna of the Atman, the eternal soul.
Only in the soul.
Knowledge resides solely, exclusively in the soul, nowhere else, period.
That's immediately tricky for, the modern mind. If I open a Shastra, a sacred text, and I read this brilliant, insightful passage, it feels like the knowledge is right there on the page.
Right.
Why can't we just say the knowledge is in the text? It seems simpler.
Because the Shastras, the books themselves, they're physical objects. They're made of letters, akshara, and ultimately they're composed of pudgal.
Which is?
Pudgal is the term for all non-sentient matter, everything that isn't soul. So knowledge is defined as this eternal attribute of the sentient soul. Philosophically, it just cannot reside in inanimate matter. The text itself is, dead matter. The soul is living consciousness.
Okay.
The two categories are just fundamentally incompatible as a place for knowledge to live.
Okay, I think I get the philosophical distinction. But then, why on earth do we call it Shrutanan, scriptural knowledge? We have these huge libraries, these sacred books, and we certainly treat them as if they are the source of knowledge. We protect them, we revere them.
Right, and this is where we absolutely need to understand the concept of upachar.
Upachar.
Upachar basically means convention or attribution or even metaphorical usage. We call it Shruta Jnan only through upachar. It's kind of a linguistic shortcut, you could say.
So we're attributing the quality to the object.
Exactly. We attribute the name knowledge to the text because the act of reading those words or hearing them spoken, that act causes the quality of Jnan to actually arise, to manifest within the soul. The book isn't the storage locker, it's the trigger. It's the catalyst that makes the internal quality wake up.
Okay, so the book is like the match.
Yeah.
And the soul is like the tinder or the wood.
Yeah.
The fire that not only exists in the wood, but you need the match to get it started.
That's a perfect analogy, yes. And we can formalize this distinction even more by talking about the two types of Shrutadnan.
Okay.
There's Dravya Shrutadnan, that's the external thing, the physical text, the matter, the script, the words on the page.
The match?
Right. And then there's Bhava Shrutadnan. This is the actual inherent realized knowledge that exists in the soul, the internal state. Precisely. And it's the bhava, that internal quality, that's the only thing that gives real spiritual benefit. And therefore, that's the true object of our deep dive today, the bhava Shruta Jnan.
Okay. So if the real beneficial knowledge, the hava kind, is inside the knower, the jnani, this realization, it immediately forces us to kind of rethink a lot of modern spiritual practice, doesn't it?
It really does.
Because there is this persistent tendency today, you see it everywhere, to elevate the physical book, sometimes even over the living teacher.
Yes, and this is a direct critique that comes up in the sources, looking at contemporary spiritual life. There's often huge emphasis placed on worshiping the physical books, treating them with immense reverence, being super careful to avoid ashatana, any form of disrespect towards the book.
Right, like not putting it on the floor, handling it carefully.
All of that, which is good in itself, but the sources say this physical worship often, tragically, leads to neglecting or even diminishing the actual jnani, the living person who possesses the bhava Shruta Jnan.
So people end up worshiping the catalyst, the match, while kind of ignoring the actual source of the fire.
Precisely that. And the principle is stated as absolutely non-negotiable. True knowledge must be acquired from the knower. The scriptures apparently state over and over again that Jnan is guru.
Meaning?
It's subject to the guru. It depends on the guru. While books are useful, definitely, and they provide Shabd word knowledge, the literal meaning, the essential item pari, which is the true meaning, the deeper purport, the context, the intention behind the words that is received only through the guru's grace, their explanation, their living example.
So the guru is like the living conduit. They give the text its soul, its bhava. But this leads to a really practical kind of modern challenge, doesn't it?
That's so.
Well, given the reach of teaching today, audiobooks, amazing video lectures online, courses from teachers all over the world, is this tradition really saying that neglecting a living teacher, even if they're maybe just locally available, in favor of, say, a recorded lecture by an arguably more enlightened teacher somewhere else, is that considered a spiritual error? That just seems wildly impractical in 2024.
It does seem impractical, but that's the critical point the tradition forces us to grapple with, especially in the modern context. The source material is actually quite strict on this. It states that reading books or relying on secondary sources, like recordings, is acceptable only when a living jnani guru is simply genuinely unavailable.
That's the only acceptable reason.
According to these texts, yes. That's the only circumstance where relying solely on the text or recordings is okay.
Wow. But what if I have a choice? Let's say there's an average decent teacher locally, someone I could actually sit in front of. But online, I can access recordings of a truly phenomenal, maybe world-renowned teacher. Which path is considered superior according to this framework?
According to these sources, you must prioritize the living guru who is present.
Even if they're lesser?
Even then. The texts warn that those who neglect a present Jnani guru, specifically to read books or listen to recordings instead, they will not attain true jhanan. The method of acquisition itself is tied fundamentally to the physical and spiritual presence. The tradition really emphasizes that lectures, the vyakhyan, must be heard directly from the guru's mouth, in the guru's presence. They use the term nishtha for this being present with focused attention. This direct embodied presence is explicitly affirmed as the true path to jhanan prapti, knowledge attainment.
So it's suggesting there's something about the physical energy, the intention, maybe the subtle transmission, and crucially, the ability to ask a question right then and there, to interact. That's what transforms mere word knowledge into real insight.
That seems to be the core idea. Now, the sources do make some accommodation for modern life. They clarify the role of these materials.
Okay, good.
Providing written texts or audio recordings is acceptable, but for two very limited purposes. First, for repetition, what they call punravartan. So after you've already heard the lecture in person, you can use the recording to review it.
Okay, that makes sense.
For reinforcement. Right. Or second, it's acceptable for those who absolutely physically cannot attend, maybe due to illness or extreme distance where it's just impossible.
Right.
But, and this is the strong caution, they warn very sternly against using these secondary materials as a justification for bypassing the living lecture, for steeping out on the living jnani when they are accessible. That neglect, that conscious bypassing, that's seen as the real barrier to attaining true knowledge.
Okay, so once we accept this hierarchy, the living jnani over the book, we can drill down to the next layer. Looking inside the knowledge itself, now we have to ask, what's more important? The actual words on the page, the text, the sutra, or the meaning behind them, the substance, the artha.
Exactly.
And this apparently starts with a pretty fascinating social critique about how people sometimes misuse texts when dealing with spiritual authority.
Yes, the sources bring up this sharp observation about challenging a jnani. It highlights this scenario where a listener might confront a spiritual master by showing them a physical book. And often it's a book maybe written by a gruhasta, a lay person, someone who might not necessarily have deep spiritual realization themselves. And the intent is to contradict what the teacher is saying.
So literally using a physical book as a kind of weapon against the authority of the living, present teacher.
That's exactly the dynamic being criticized. Now, if you show the book with genuine jigyasa, real curiosity, a sincere desire for clarification, the sources say that's perfectly fine. That's part of learning.
But the intent matters.
Massively. Using the book with the underlying intent of saying, look, this written text says X, so your living word must be wrong. Especially if that text was just copied or compiled by a layperson, that's considered unacceptable, a kind of spiritual insolence. And the core dilemma it poses is actually quite profound. Who should you ultimately follow? The original Jnani Bhagavat, the truly enlightened beings who actually articulated the original teachings in the first place? Or should you follow those who merely copy, compile, and reproduce their words centuries later?
It sounds almost like a battle between, I don't know, the historian preserving the letter versus the mystic embodying the spirit.
That's a great way to put it. It is. And this whole discussion sets up the central thesis for this part of our dive. Knowledge, fundamentally, is divided into two parts. Sutra, that's the text, the aphorism, the literal string of words, and artha, that's the meaning, the substance, the underlying purport.
Okay. Sutra and artha.
And the definitive statement, the core principle here, is that artha is significantly more important. The word used is mahan, great or superior. Artha is mahan compared to sutra.
Now, that's genuinely counterintuitive for many traditions, especially those heavily reliant on scripture. I would instinctively assume the text, the sutra, has to be primary. Doesn't the text anchor the meaning? I think the sutra must come first to give the artha a foundation. Why do these sources flip that hierarchy so decisively?
They tackle that head on. They ask the question directly. Does sutra lead to artha, or does artha lead to sutra? Which comes first?
And the answer is?
The answer is firm. Artha leads to sutra. The meaning comes first. They lay out the process of revelation and documentation quite meticulously, chronologically.
Okay.
The Arhat Bhagavan, these are the fully enlightened beings, the ones who have reached omniscience. They first speak the Artha. They articulate the realized truth of the universe. They basically pour out the substance, the meaning, through their divine speech.
So the meaning exists first, maybe in a formless way or as spoken word, before it's written down.
Exactly. It exists as pure, realized truth expressed verbally. Then, the Ganadhar Bhagavan, who are the chief disciples, incredibly brilliant beings themselves, they take that spoken truth, that artha, and then they compose the sutras.
Why?
For the explicit purpose of preservation and transmission, to make it manageable, teachable, durable across time. So the text, the sutra, is created second. It comes after the meaning has already been revealed. It's a necessary tool, yes, but it's not the primary source of the truth itself.
This is clarified so beautifully by that analogy. They use the one about the flower and the thread. Let's make sure we really internalize that imagery because it seems central.
It really is. So the artha, right, the essential truth spoken by the enlightened one, it's compared to a rain of flowers, a fulan novarsad. Just imagine trying to actually manage a sudden, massive downpour of millions of delicate blossom.
Chaos. Beautiful chaos, maybe, but impossible to handle.
Exactly. They're glorious, scattered everywhere, but they'd be incredibly difficult to preserve, to transfer, to manage over time. They're inherently fleeting in that form.
Right.
So the absolutely crucial role of the Ganadhara, the chief disciple, is to take these flowers, the artha, and carefully string them onto a thread. And that thread is the sutra. By doing this, they create a manageable, organized garland.
Ah, and the garland can be handled easily. It can be passed down through generations. It could be preserved, given, taken.
Precisely. And the linguistic evidence backs this up perfectly. The word sutra itself, in Sanskrit, literally means thread or string.
Wow. That really seals the analogy, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And the conclusion drawn from this is inescapable.
Yeah.
The sutras were created for the artha. The artha is the precious, fragrant, valuable substance, the flowers. The sutra is just the necessary organizational architecture, the thread that holds it together. The artha holds the priority.
Okay, the analogy is powerful. But this priority, this superiority of artha over sutra, it needs to be demonstrated beyond just metaphor, right? Where do we see concrete, practical evidence in the tradition that the spiritual authority actually ranks artha higher?
We see it very clearly in at least two major practical domains. First, in the system of penance, and second, in leadership selection.
Okay, let's start with penance. How does that show the difference?
So consider the rules for prayashita. That's the system of prescribed penances for various wrongdoings or mistakes. If someone commits ashatana, which means disrespect towards the sutra, the physical text.
Like mishandling the book.
Yes, or maybe reciting it incorrectly out of carelessness. There's a specific penance prescribed for that. However, the sources state that the penance prescribed for disrespecting the artha, the meaning, the substance is explicitly greater, more severe.
Ah, okay. So the legal framework itself values the meaning more highly than the words.
Exactly. This kind of legislative hierarchy within the spiritual rules provides clear proof that the meaning is considered spiritually more sacred, more fundamental than its textual container.
That's a very clear confirmation. Okay, what about in leadership? You mentioned the selection of the Acharya Bhagavan, the head spiritual leader. How does that play out?
This is really where the rubber meets the road for the community, for the shasan. When a new spiritual leader is needed to guide the whole Sangh, the community, the absolute first preference, the ideal candidate, is always the individual who knows both, someone who has mastered both the sutra and the artha.
The complete package.
Right. They understand the text and its deep meaning. But, and this is the key point, if such a person isn't available, the sources provide a very stark, clear instruction. The position, the leadership, is given to the Arthajnani, the one who knows the substance and the meaning. It is not given to the Sutradnani alone, the one who only knows the text.
Wow. So someone could potentially recite every single verse of Scripture perfectly from memory, but if they don't truly understand its application, its deep meaning, how it guides life, they're actually disqualified from leading the community.
Precisely. Knowing only the text without grasping the artha is explicitly deemed useless for the practical leadership and guidance of the community. Why? Because the Arthajnani, the one who understands the substance, they can answer complex, new questions that aren't explicitly in the text. They can manage the community effectively, Sangha Sanchalan. They can solve real-world problems and disputes samasya no uko, based on underlying principles, not just rote memorization.
It's because the knowledge has become internalized, right? It's
Yeah.
separated from just being dependent on the external source, the
Yeah.
book. Tell us more about the practical power of this internalized Artha Janan.
Well, the speaker in the source material actually shares a wonderful personal example of this.
Oh.
They mention that even though they might have forgotten the specific verse, the actual gathas of certain very advanced texts, like the 4 karma granthas, which deal with complex karma theory,
Okay.
they still know the substance, the core principles, the padarth, completely by heart. They can still teach and explain those intricate karma doctrines accurately and effectively without needing to constantly refer back to the specific verse numbers. That ability, that's pure artha knowledge in action.
That's impressive. It's like knowing the physics without needing the textbook equation memorized on the spot.
Exactly. And it's this kind of capability that mattered for historical leaders. They mention Acharya Jayaghosh Sureshwarji Maharaj, who was renowned as a master of Artha principles. They called him a Khand Vidwan. He effectively guided the community precisely because he deeply understood the underlying principles of existence and conduct, not just the memorized texts.
And this power of Artha, this understanding of meaning, it even extends to something as fundamental as maintaining the purity of the sacred texts themselves, especially given that, historically, they were prone to errors in copying.
Absolutely critical point. We have to remember, in ancient times, these texts were hastilicate prat. They were all handwritten manuscripts.
Right, no printing presses.
No printing presses, and they were often copied by scribes who were paid for the job and, well, not always perfectly diligent or knowledgeable themselves. Errors crept in. Finding perfect, completely error-free ancient manuscripts is almost mythical. It's incredibly rare.
So if you find a discrepancy between manuscripts or something just seems wrong in a text, how do you decide what the correct reading should be?
You can't just rely on counting manuscripts, because maybe the majority version is the one with the error.
Right.
No. The sources state clearly the decision that a written sutra contains a mistake, an impurity, and a shuddhi, and that it requires correction. That decision can only be made by a true jnani. And how do they make it? By using their deep, internalized understanding of the artha. The meaning acts as the ultimate benchmark, the final quality control mechanism for the text itself.
Amazing. The meaning corrects the text, not the other way around.
Precisely. And there's another specific anecdote shared in the source material about this. The speaker themselves apparently encountered errors in a printed book, the Samachar Karan, which was already about 400 years old.
Okay.
By relying on their deep Artha Jnan and carefully comparing various available manuscripts, they were able to identify and correct over 80 passages where the text seemed corrupted or nonsensical. And crucially, they found that their corrections, based on the underlying meaning, almost always aligned perfectly with what must have been the original enlightened author's intention. But the text emphasizes this authority to authenticate and even correct the sacred text. It belongs only to those very special jnanas who have truly mastered the artha. It's not something just anyone can do based on grammar or logic alone.
So the meaning is the eternal, unchanging truth, the constant. While a physical text, the sutra, is subject to the decay of time and human error. That's a really powerful validation of why we must prioritize substance over the literal word.
Okay, so now that we've firmly established that artha, the meaning, the substance, holds the ultimate key, let's really dig into what artha actually means in our day-to-day spiritual life. It means meaning, yes, but maybe more robustly, it signifies padarth, which translates roughly to the principle or the substance of reality, the core concept.
Okay, can you give us a simple, concrete example of a principle that serves as artha?
Sure. Take a common spiritual principle, like not eating food at night. That rule, that guideline, that is an artha. It's a principle of conduct based on deeper reasons. This principle exists as a concept, independently. And somewhere in the scriptures, you'll find the textual support, the Shastra Vachan, that explains or justifies this artha. So when a teacher gives a lecture, a vyakyan, what are they fundamentally doing? They're engaged in the detailed analysis, the exposition, the vivechan of that artha, of that underlying principle. In more technical terms, this whole process of deeply analyzing the substance is called anuyoga.
Anuyoga.
Okay.
So that's like the deep dive into the why and how of the principles. But this brings us right back to what feels like the most challenging, maybe even jarring philosophical statement in this whole discussion. The scriptures' flat-out rebuttal of what most people consider knowledge.
Right.
If I know a million facts, let's say I know history, science, complex mathematics, maybe I've memorized entire encyclopedias, is any of that considered Janan? in this context?
It's a crucial question, and most people instinctively would say, yes, of course, that's a knowledgeable person. But the Shastra, the scriptures, state emphatically, no, it is not Shannon. And this, as you say, is one of the most radical shifts in perspective this tradition demands.
So just to be clear, whatever a Mithyadrashti knows, and that term means.
A Mithyadrashti is an individual who has wrong or deluded vision. Their fundamental perception of reality, particularly of the self or the soul, is flawed.
Okay, so whatever this person with flawed fundamental vision knows, no matter how vast that volume of information is, it's all classified as ajnana, as ignorance.
That's what the text states. Yeah.
Wow. So let's take an extreme example. Someone has a PhD in astrophysics, they speak 5 languages fluently, they've memorized the entire Constitution. But if they lack a specific spiritual understanding, if their core vision is diluted according to this system, then that entire impressive intellectual architecture, it's spiritually worthless. It's just ignorance. That seems incredibly severe, almost dismissive of genuine human achievement.
It does sound severe from a worldly perspective, absolutely, but it's deemed necessary within this framework to establish clear spiritual priorities. The core reason for this classification is that the Mithyadrashti, the one with diluted vision,
Yes.
they fundamentally misidentify the true nature of the self, the soul, the Atman. Their knowledge, however vast, is ultimately oriented either towards the transient material world or towards a misidentified temporary self. Because they lack what's called samyak darshan, right vision or right faith, their knowledge is built on a foundation that's considered flawed from the ultimate perspective.
So it can't lead to liberation.
Exactly. It can't provide ultimate liberation or truly benefit the eternal soul in the long run. It's like building a magnificent skyscraper on unstable ground. The foundation is wrong, so the whole structure, no matter how impressive, is ultimately compromised from a spiritual standpoint.
Okay. That's a heavy concept. So to get past that harsh binary of ignorance, we need a more nuanced understanding.
Precisely. We need to move beyond just saying it's all ignorance and look at the 3 distinct types of jnan that are outlined in texts like the Upadesh Pad Shodashak. This gives us a much clearer picture.
All right. Let's break down these 3 types. Let's start with the type of knowledge that the scriptures basically dismiss as spiritually worthless.
Okay. That is type 1, Vishaya Prativash Janan. You could translate this roughly as sensory or informational knowledge.
Okay.
This is just simple, objective data about the world. Things like sugar is sweet, chili is spicy, the stock market went up today, or even slightly more complex worldly observations like money can buy pretty much everything.
Basic facts and common observations about how the world works.
Exactly. And crucially, this type of knowledge completely lacks any contemplation about how this information affects the soul. Is it beneficial? Is it harmful? That question isn't even asked.
So what's its value to the Atman, the soul?
The texts are blunt. 0 benefit. Kasho J. Lavana. Absolutely no spiritual profit. It's purely for navigating the world for everyday transactions, what they call lok vavahar. And this is important. When people pray for blessings, like, may the knowledge I gain stick with me, the enlightened ones would explicitly not be blessing the attainment of this first type of knowledge. Because it's not considered true jhanan in the sense of being a spiritual quality, a gunrup. It's just data.
Okay. So type 1 is just raw data, spiritually inert. Type 2, then, must be where the actual spiritual transformation begins to happen.
Exactly. Type 2 is called Atma Parinatamath Jhanan. We can translate that as soul-transforming knowledge. This is where genuine spiritual deliberation, real vicharna, kicks in.
How does it work?
This type of knowledge focuses intently, specifically, on what is beneficial, Hitkar, and what is harmful, a Hitkar, to my soul, my own individual soul. It involves deep introspection, thinking about consequences, connecting actions to their spiritual results.
Okay, let's use that sweets example again to really contrast type 1 and type 2.
Yeah.
How would each approach it?
All right. Type 1 knowledge simply registers the sensory data. These sweets are tasty. End of story. Type 2 knowledge takes that observation and immediately subjects it to spiritual scrutiny, to consequence analysis. Okay, these sweets are tasty, but if I eat them simply because they are tasty, just following that sensory pleasure, I will inevitably cultivate attachment rag. And attachment rag is what binds me with karma. And binding karma ultimately harms my soul's journey towards liberation. You see the difference?
Yes, it's adding that layer of what does this mean for me spiritually.
Exactly. Same with the money example. Type 1 says, money can buy everything. It's a worldly observation. Type 2 introduces the crucial internal caution. Okay, maybe money seems powerful, but if I allow myself to become deluded by attachment to money, a state the texts call Moksha, intense possessiveness or delusion,
Yes.
then I risk a terrible spiritual fate. I could end up suffering immensely in future lives, just like in that cautionary story about the mongoose who died guarding treasure. It brings in the potential harm to the soul. So this constant awareness of hitkar and ahitkar, beneficial versus harmful for the soul, this deeper deliberation, this is identified as the karujnan, the true knowledge, the knowledge we're actually meant to practice and pursue, Purusharth, especially during observances like Nam Pancham.
Okay, so type 1 is data. Type 2 is deliberative wisdom focused on the soul. Type 3, then, must represent the ultimate stage where knowledge is fully integrated.
That's right. Type 3 is Tattva Samvedanjnan. This is a bit harder to translate concisely. Maybe self-realization jhana, or knowledge leading inevitably to conduct.
Okay. What characterizes this type?
It's knowledge that is so deep, so completely integrated into the person's being, that it inherently, automatically results in corresponding action. There's no gap. The individual possessing this level of jhana simply only engages in what they know to be beneficial, and they automatically, effortlessly abandon what they know to be harmful.
But wait, doesn't that sound more like action itself? Like good conduct, Aitren, rather than knowledge, Janan? But where's the line? Is it just behavior at that point?
That's a very common question, and a crucial distinction the scriptures make. While it looks like pure Aitren, pure conduct, the text insists that the level, the quality, the tar of the Janan itself is fundamentally different. The knowledge is so profound, so pervasive, that it inevitably leads to the correct action. It's defined as Jen that must, by its very nature, result in a Chen. It's a state where the distinction almost dissolves because the knowing is the doing.
Okay, that's subtle. Can we use that contrasting example you mentioned earlier? The difference between someone's knowledge about avoiding, say, ice cream versus their knowledge about avoiding meat. How does that illustrate type 2 versus type 3?
Right. So for many sincere spiritual aspirants today, their knowledge about avoiding a modern indulgence like ice cream might be at the type 2 level, meaning they know it's probably not great for them spiritually, maybe causes attachment or dulls awareness. They deliberate about it. Should I eat this? I know I shouldn't. They understand the hitkar intellectually, but they might still struggle. They might occasionally slip up and eat it. The Aitren, the conduct, isn't perfectly aligned with the knowledge yet. There's a gap.
Okay, that's type 2 in action. Or inaction sometimes.
No. Right. Now contrast that with the knowledge an aspirant might have regarding a core spiritual prohibition, something deeply ingrained, like avoiding meat for someone committed to nonviolence. For them, that knowledge is often at the type 3 level, Tattva Samvedanjnan.
How so?
It's not even a question of deliberation anymore. They cannot even conceive of eating meat, perhaps not even in a dream. The thought simply doesn't register as a viable option. It's completely alien to their being. That absolute effortless alignment between understanding meat is harmful, wrong, and conduct, I never eat meat, the thought is repulsive, demonstrates that deeper, transformative, integral level of knowledge. That complete fusion is type 3.
Wow. That makes the distinction much clearer. It's the difference between knowing you shouldn't touch the stove and having been burned so badly you instinctively recoil from it.
That's a good way to think about it. The knowledge has become embodied. And this brings us to the consequence. If that gap does exist, if you're stuck at type 2 understanding, but fail to consistently translate it into type 3 action and embodiment, the spiritual consequence is described as quite severe, using that very famous analogy.
Right. The warning about untransformed knowledge. Tell us about that.
Yes, the warning is crucial. The person who knows the truth, who has attained type 2 Janan, who understands what's right and wrong for the soul, but then consistently fails to put it into practice, fails in their akaran. That person, the texts say, receives no spiritual fruit, no real benefit from their knowledge.
Not at all, even if they know a lot.
None of the intended benefit. Their state is famously likened to that of a donkey carrying a heavy load of sandalwood on its back.
Ah, the sandalwood donkey.
Exactly. The donkey bears the heavy burden of the weight, all the strain of remembering the complex knowledge, reciting the rules, carrying the sutras in its head. It feels the load. But because it never actually opens the sandalwood, never applies it, never experiences its effects, it never gets the cooling comfort, the beautiful fragrance, the true bliss, the fruit that the sandalwood of the knowledge is supposed to provide, it only ever experiences the burden, the weight, the effort of carrying it.
Okay, this brings everything together for the practical application, doesn't it? If true knowledge is all about this internal transformation, about striving to move from type 2 deliberation towards type 3 embodied wisdom, then how should a day like Janan Pancham, which is supposedly dedicated to knowledge, actually be observed? It clearly can't just be about, ritually putting your notebooks away for the day.
Absolutely not. That misses the entire point. The day, Janan Pancham, is fundamentally meant for the Aradhana. And Aradhana means dedicated worship, focused practice, striving towards.
Type 2 and type 3.
Precisely. The dedicated practice and cultivation of type 2 and type 3 jad. And how is this achieved? Not by merely worshiping physical books or ceasing study for a day, but through intense purusharth.
Meaning diligent, focused effort.
Yes. Diligent, conscious effort specifically aimed at knowledge attainment. Real, transformative knowledge. So, true worship on Janan Pancham, according to this view, is an action. It means making a solemn vow, a resolution, to actively seek out knowledge from the living Janes.
Like committing to attend lectures.
Yes, or setting a specific, measurable commitment for yourself. Maybe deciding, I will dedicate X number of hours this year purely to the pursuit of this deeper wisdom. And crucially, starting that discipline today. That is considered the authentic worship of Janan.
And the sources make this really remarkable claim about this very effort, this Purusharth for knowledge, don't they? They rank it extremely highly among all spiritual practices.
They absolutely do. The tradition outlines 12 types of penance or tapa. These are core spiritual disciplines. 6 are external, like fasting or physical austerity. 6 are internal, like meditation or service.
Okay.
Among all 12 of these fundamental penances, Swadhyay, which specifically means the effort for jhanan attainment, self-study, striving for wisdom, is called the Shrestha.
The highest.
The highest, the supreme penance among all 12 types. Think about that. This is a truly profound philosophical statement. The intentional, sometimes difficult effort of learning, of internalizing artha, of purifying the mind through wisdom, that is ranked above even strenuous physical austerities like prolonged fasting.
Wow. So mental and intellectual discipline aimed at wisdom is considered the peak spiritual practice.
That's the emphasis here. It highlights the purification of the mind, and the deep integration of wisdom is seen as perhaps the most challenging and therefore the highest form of spiritual discipline.
And when a person actually commits to that highest discipline and they start to achieve genuine jhanan type 2 moving towards type 3, it apparently changes the very nature of how they communicate, how they present themselves.
Yes, it's said to create this unique, unmistakable quality of authenticity. A true Jnani's presentation, their way of speaking, is said to have a profound resonance, a special quality they call ranako.
Ranako, like a vibration or a depth.
Exactly. Their words carry the weight, the conviction, the energy of realized substance, of internalized artha. Conversely, an ajnani, someone without that deep realization.
Yes.
They might possess great rhetorical skill, they might be incredibly charismatic, speak beautifully, hold an audience spellbound, but their words, however polished, will ultimately lack that deep ranaka, that resonance, because they're speaking from mere shabnan, word knowledge, or maybe just Dravya, Shrutajnan, book knowledge, not from the core of internalized lived truth.
It's the difference between a performance and true possession of the knowledge.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the inner state that comes with this possession, the sheer joy, the bliss experienced by one who possesses true transformative jhanan. It's described in the scriptures as simply indescribable. Varnan nakari shakai. You can't put it into words.
This really highlights the profound value placed on genuine wisdom, which leads us directly into the final, very pointed critique that appears in the source material about how modern observance of these sacred days, like Janan Pancham, has often become corrupted, how the original spirit has been completely lost or inverted.
Yes, the sources are quite uncompromising on this point. They state that the original intent of Janan Pancham has, in many common practices, been distorted and transformed into Labh Pancham.
Which means?
Labh means benefit or profit. So knowledge Pancham has become profit Pancham. The sacred intention has literally been swapped out for worldly commercial gain.
How did that happen? What was the original intent?
Historically, the day was meant for deep spiritual reflection. Maybe for observing Pasha, that's a specific practice involving temporary vows akin to monastic life. And definitely for Tyag, the conscious abandonment, or at least pausing, of starting new worldly activities, especially commercial ventures. These are called Aram Samaram.
Okay, so it was originally intended as a kind of pause button on material life, a day deliberately set aside and dedicated purely to spiritual pursuits, especially knowledge-seeking.
Exactly that. A day of turning inward, focusing on the soul, on Jinan. But what often happens now It's widely observed, particularly in some business communities, as the most auspicious day to start new worldly activities, to open new businesses, to sign deals, to celebrate commercial profit and financial beginnings.
That's a complete inversion, from renouncing worldly beginnings to celebrating them.
It's a total inversion of the original spiritual intent of renunciation, reflection, and knowledge-seeking.
And this isn't just an isolated issue with Jinan Pancham, is it? The sources suggest this commercialization or watering down is part of a wider trend affecting other sacred observances too.
Yes, absolutely. The sources point, for instance, to the broader corruption of how festivals like Diwali are often observed. Diwali, too, was originally intended for deep spiritual reflection, for connecting with the teachings, often including specific religious observances like the Shashti fast that traditionally followed the main celebrations. It was meant to be a time to pause the relentless cycle of worldly action and focus on inner light.
But
Instead, what has it largely become for many? A day primarily dedicated to the mere consumption of special sweets and snacks, mitai matiya, and engaging in purely social gatherings, often completely neglecting the underlying spiritual discipline, the introspection, the jnan.
So the outward form might remain, but the inner substance, the artha, has been hollowed out.
Precisely. And the final conclusion drawn in these texts is stark. Engaging in these kinds of external corrupted practices, even if done with enthusiasm, does not fulfill the requirement of true aratana, true worship or spiritual practice.
And
therefore, they yield no genuine spiritual benefit. The critical instruction that emerges for you, for the listener, is the absolute necessity of first understanding the secret principles, the deep meanings, the rahasya. Behind the Lord's teachings, you have to find the artha. And then, crucially, you have to practice accordingly. Simply changing the name of the day to Prophet Pancham while engaging in actions diametrically opposed to the original spiritual guidance, well, that's presented as the ultimate form of ajnana. It's knowledge, or rather activity, that brings absolutely no real reward.
Wow. This entire deep dive has been just a massive recalibration, hasn't it? A complete rethink of our definition of knowledge itself. We've learned that true jnan, the kind that matters, resides deep within the soul, not just on the pages of a text. And that the meaning, the substance, the artha, the flowers, that's the ultimate source. While the text, the sutra, is merely the thread holding them together, it feels like a powerful call to action, really, to move from being that donkey just carrying the heavy burden of information, to striving to become a jnani who actually experiences the fragrance, the benefit of the wisdom.
Exactly. And that the deepest, most transformative learning comes not just from books, but from actively seeking the guidance and the presence, the ranako, of the living knower. And then applying the substance of those teachings constantly, filtering everything in your life through that crucial lens. Is this hitkar beneficial or ahidkar harmful to my soul's journey? It's that continuous conscious effort towards internalizing and integrating wisdom that truly defines the spiritual life, according to this view.
Which leaves us, as always, with our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to carry forward and mull over. Is Swathi, that dedicated conscious effort to gain true knowledge and wisdom, to cultivate Artha Jnan, is genuinely ranked as the Shrestha, the highest, the supreme practice among all 12 spiritual penances? Then how much time, how much energy, how much Purusharth should you realistically commit each day or each week to moving past just collecting information, type 1, and truly engaging in the hard work of attaining that soul-benefiting transformative wisdom, type 2 and 3? What does your personal commitment to the highest penance actually look like starting today? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into something fundamental, aren't we? It's one of those big philosophical questions. The link between knowing something and actually, doing something about it.
That's right. And we're looking at it through a very specific lens, the spiritual path, the Moksha Marga.
Exactly. We're diving into jhana, which, broadly speaking, is wisdom or knowledge, and kriya, action or practice. How do these two relate on the journey to liberation?
It's a question that's been tackled for centuries. And the sources we're looking at today, they don't really let you pick a side. They argue pretty strongly that you can't just have one without the other.
Right. So our mission, our deep dive today, is really to unpack this ancient idea that genuine spiritual progress only happens when knowledge and action are both operating fully.
And that means they have to be perfectly in sync, working together, always combined. Not just sometimes, but always.
That sets the tone immediately, doesn't it? We're not searching for which one is better in isolation.
No, it's about the partnership.
So over the next, say, half hour or so, we'll dig into why the scriptures say this combination is absolutely non-negotiable. We'll explore some really fascinating analogies
Two really vivid ones, yeah.
that ancient texts use to explain this connection. And then, and this is crucial, we'll look at whether, even though both are needed, one might hold, let's say, a greater inherent spiritual weight.
Even if they both have to be present for the journey to actually happen, it's a subtle but important distinction.
Okay, let's start right at the foundation. Why this combination? Why is it that on the spiritual path, unlike maybe in other areas of life where you can be purely academic or purely action-oriented, why can't jhana or kriya stand alone here?
Well, it boils down to their distinct functions. They each do something completely different, but those functions totally depend on each other.
Okay.
So jnana, that's your understanding, your wisdom, your discernment. It's what tells you, okay, this is the path. It shows you the goal, warns you about the pitfalls. It provides the vision, the map.
Right, the what's and why.
Exactly. But then kriya, that's the engine. It's the effort, the actual doing the practices, the conduct, the austerities that physically, mentally, verbally move your consciousness along that path.
So one without the other is fundamentally incomplete.
Totally. If you have kriya without jhana, you're moving, sure, but you have no idea where you're going. You could be running hard in the completely wrong direction.
Wasted effort or worse.
Or worse, yeah. And if you have jhana without kriya, you've got this beautiful, detailed map.
But you're just sitting there looking at it.
Exactly. Your vision is just theory. It's not applied. It doesn't translate into any actual progress. You're stuck.
And the scriptures jump right in with a really clear image for this, don't they? The Vajrakanyuti Grantha uses the chariot analogy.
It's a classic. And it's perfect because a chariot is all about movement, about going somewhere.
Right.
The text is very direct. It says knowledge without action, useless. Action without knowledge, also useless. And then it says they are the two wheels of this chariot.
And you immediately get the picture. Try picturing a chariot with just one wheel.
Yeah, it's impossible.
Say it only has the jhana wheel, the knowledge wheel. Maybe it tips over. It certainly doesn't roll forward.
It may just spin in place, right? Or the whole structure just collapses. The knowledge provides the framework, the outline for the journey, but it can't generate forward motion by itself.
And the same applies if you only have the kriya wheel, the action wheel.
Right. You've got the potential for movement, for energy.
Right.
But without the balancing force of the other wheel, the understanding, it's unstable.
It veers off course or crashes.
Exactly. The whole thing falls apart. So for real progress on that spiritual path, the Moksha Marga, you need both wheels turning together, perfectly balanced, sharing the load.
It's such a strong mechanical metaphor. But this idea isn't just mechanical. It pops up in ethical teachings, too. We move from the chariot to a really powerful story in the Sambodhisar Grantha, the fable of the blind man and the lame man.
Oh, yeah. This one is absolutely key to understanding the relationship. It maps jhana and kriya onto human limitations in a really visceral way.
So the setup is dramatic. Two men trapped in a house that's on fire.
And that fire, symbolically, is sasura, the burning cycle of birth and death we're trying to escape. It creates this sense of urgency.
Okay, so let's look at them individually first when they fail. There's a lame man. He represents jhana.
Right. That's the mapping. He can see perfectly. He knows where the fire is. He knows exactly where the door is. He can figure out the safest path.
He has the complete theoretical solution.
Complete. But he can't move quickly enough. His legs don't work properly. So despite having perfect knowledge, perfect vision, he can't act on it effectively.
And the result?
He burns. His knowledge, because it wasn't combined with action, couldn't save him.
Wow. Okay, then there's the blind man. He's the symbol for kriya.
Right. He's strong. He's physically capable. He can run. He has all the momentum, the power for action. He can't see. He has no idea where the exit is. So what does he do? He runs towards the most intense sensation.
Which is the light and heat of the fire.
Exactly. He runs into the danger because he lacks the guiding vision of jnana. His pure action, without knowledge, is self-destructive.
So individually, they both perish. It's a stark warning that just doing a lot isn't enough. It can actually make things worse if it's not guided.
Absolutely. Vigorous, unguided action is dangerous.
But the solution, the escape, comes from their collaboration.
It's simple but profound. The blind man lifts the lame man onto his shoulders.
So the lame man, jhana, becomes the navigator. He sees the path and gives directions. Go left. Avoid that beam. Straight ahead now.
And the blind man, kriya, provides the locomotion. He provides the legs, the speed, the physical force to carry them both out.
And together, they escape the burning house. They achieve liberation from that immediate danger.
It's a perfect synergy. And the philosophical takeaway the text draws is really specific. Jhana is lame, it sees but can't walk on its own. Kriya is blind, it can walk but can't see where to go.
They're fundamentally interdependent.
And the text adds that beautiful touch. They must walk holding each other's finger. It's not just a one-off cooperation. It implies constant mutual guidance and support, step by step.
That image of holding hands really emphasizes the intimacy of the connection. We see this same theme again, maybe in a more action-oriented context with the swimming analogy. This comes from the Sajjo, related to right faith.
Yeah, this one uses the fear of drowning, which is pretty primal. It's about crossing the ocean of Sazar.
So how does this one illustrate the problem of incompleteness?
It presents two scenarios of failure. First, imagine someone falls into the ocean. This person is an expert swimmer, theoretically. They've studied fluid dynamics, know every stroke perfectly. They have the jhana.
Okay, they know how to swim.
Exactly, but when they hit the water, they just freeze. They don't actually move their arms and legs. They fail to perform the kriya.
So despite knowing everything, they drown.
They drown. Knowledge alone wasn't enough. Then the second person falls in. This person has no idea how to swim, zero jhana about technique or buoyancy.
But they act.
Oh, they act vigorously. They thrash, they splash, they expend enormous energy, pure kriya. But it's panicked, inefficient, directionless.
And they also drown. Probably faster.
Probably faster, yeah. They exhaust themselves quickly.
So the lesson is?
To survive, to cross that ocean of worldly existence and reach liberation, you need both. You need the knowledge of how to swim, the understanding of the principles, and you need the consistent applied action of moving your limbs correctly, the actual practice. Sheer effort isn't enough if it's not informed by wisdom.
Okay, so we've hammered home this idea that jhana and kriya absolutely have to work together. But now we need to be really precise about what we mean by jhana. Because if it was just book learning, maybe the blind man could have just memorized directions.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. The sources are very careful here. They make a crucial distinction. Jhana, in this context, is not the same as just having information, or mahiti.
Ah, okay. So there's a difference.
A huge difference. The texts actually lay out a kind of three-level hierarchy to make this clear, especially relevant for us today, swimming in data.
Right. Level 1?
Level 1 is information, mahiti. This is just raw data, a factual statement. The example given is, money has the power to buy many things. It's true. It's a fact about the world.
Okay, simple fact. Level 2.
Level 2 is knowledge. This is understanding the application of that information. So sticking with the money example, it's knowing what the things you bought do, how to use them effectively. It's functional understanding, the how-to.
Got it. Information is what, knowledge is how. So what's level 3?
Level 3 is wisdom jhana in its true deep sense. And this goes beyond just application. It involves critical ethical discernment.
Okay.
The example is knowing not just how to use money, but what should be bought and what should not be bought based on what truly benefits your soul in the long run.
So it's adding a layer of should, a moral compass.
Precisely. The core definition given for true wisdom, sometimes called ahapa, is the capacity to distinguish what leads to the soul's welfare from what leads to its detriment, ahit. It's the power of viveka, discrimination.
Without that, the information and the functional knowledge are incomplete.
Potentially useless or even dangerous. Remember the blind man. His action, kriya, was powerful, but without the jnana, the lame man's discerning vision, it led him straight into the fire. Raw information without wisdom's filter can power harmful actions. Wisdom ensures your efforts actually build you up spiritually.
That clarity on wisdom leads us straight into a very practical, almost pedagogical debate. If you need both, which one should come first? Do you give someone the understanding, the jnana, first, and then tell them to act? Or do you get them started with the action, the kriya, and hope the understanding follows?
Yeah, this is a classic argument. And it comes from a very logical place, right? Some people argue quite strongly. Look, action without understanding is kind of pointless, maybe even flawed. So you must provide the full understanding first, get the theory straight, then do the practice.
It sounds neat. A clear sequence. Jhana first, kriya second.
It sounds neat, but the sources say, nope, that strict rule is wrong. It's actually spiritually inefficient, even clumsy, to apply that universally.
Why? Why isn't that the best way?
Because people are different. The teaching method has to be tailored to the individual's spiritual level, their readiness, what the texts call their kaka.
Their capacity or stage of development.
Exactly. A true spiritual guide, a jhani, needs to assess that. For someone who's very intellectual, maybe skeptical, you might need to provide the jhana first. build their conviction.
Right. They need the why before they'll commit to the what.
Mm-hmm. But for someone else, maybe someone younger or less intellectual, or maybe someone stuck in bad habits, just talking theory might not work. You might need to initiate the action first.
Get them doing the practice.
Yeah, get them doing it. Even if they don't fully grasp the why yet, the act itself starts to create the right impressions, the sanskaras. And those impressions can then open them up to understanding the knowledge later.
So a one-size-fits-all rule just doesn't work in spiritual teaching.
It actively hinders it. The sequence depends entirely on the person.
The source gives a really relatable example here, contrasting a child and a young adult. Let's start with the 3-year-old who doesn't want to go to school.
Right. Think about it. What do? Does the parent sit the crying toddler down and deliver a lecture on the long-term economic benefits of education?
Chuckles. No, of course not.
Do you explain compound interest, career prospects, finding a good spouse because you got good grades?
It would be absurd. The child literally cannot process that, Jana. Their kaka isn't there.
Exactly. So what actually happened to most of us? The source points out our parents basically made us go, maybe gently, maybe less gently.
Often crying the whole way.
Often crying. The action, the kriya of going to school was enforced, and the real understanding, the appreciation of the benefits, Jana, only came much, much later, sometimes years later.
So in early development, action often has to precede full understanding.
It absolutely does. Now, flip that. Consider the 25-year-old. Maybe they're smart, capable, but just lazy. They won't start a business, won't look for a job seriously.
Okay.
Now, what's the approach? Do you physically drag them out of bed? Do you slap them and say, go get a job?
Probably not going to be very effective. Might just cause resentment.
Exactly. At that stage of maturity, force, kriya first, is likely counterproductive. You have to engage their intellect.
You reason with them. You present to jhana.
You talk about financial independence, show them business plans, maybe point out successful peers. You appeal to their understanding, hoping the jhana will motivate the kriya.
So the approach is completely reversed based on their maturity, their kaka.
Completely. And the crucial point the source makes is that only a true jnani, someone with deep wisdom, can accurately assess that kaka and know whether to lead with knowledge or action. Spiritual guidance isn't a formula. It's expert diagnosis.
This interplay, this back and forth between knowing and doing, isn't just theoretical. The speaker in our source material shares quite a bit about their own personal journey, which really grounds this.
It's a fascinating perspective. They mentioned taking Dika, renunciation, at 27. This wasn't someone naive. They'd completed a demanding computer engineering degree from VJTI in Mumbai, no less.
A top institution.
Right, and held a significant job. So intellectually very capable, very grounded in the modern world.
And their preparation for renunciation was intense.
Incredibly intense on the jhana side. They mentioned that by the time they were just 15, they had already studied some extremely advanced, complex religious texts.
Wait, which ones?
Things like Panyaka Praman on epistemology, Karkaran on levels of experience, Tattvartha Sutra, a foundational text, and even Karma Grantha, which are deep dives into karma theory. Very heavy stuff.
Wow, at 15.
Yeah. And they say they read over 300 religious books by the time they actually took Dikko at 27. So you'd say their intellectual understanding, their jhana, was incredibly well developed beforehand.
Absolutely. They went in with eyes wide open, intellectually speaking.
You'd think so. But here's the kicker. The speaker says this now, looking back after 23 years of actually living the life of renunciation, the kriya.
Okay.
They say that their real understanding of the core questions like, why really take Dikko? Or what does this disciplined life sagama truly mean is much, much clearer now than it was back then, even with all that prior study.
So the practice deepened the understanding that initially seemed complete.
Exponentially. It wasn't that the initial jhana was wrong, but the lived experience, the kriya, transformed it from intellectual knowledge into profound embodied wisdom.
That perfectly illustrates the feedback loop you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. The initial understanding, jhana, propelled them into the action, kriya. But then the daily grind, the challenges, the realities of that action over decades created deeper insights, which then refined the understanding, which in turn likely informed how they continued the practice.
They feed each other. Understanding leads to better action, and action leads to deeper understanding.
It's a continuous upward spiral. And the source reminds us this isn't unique to jhana and kriya. The same dynamic applies to other related pairs in the philosophy, like nishkaya, which is like inner certainty or conviction, and vyavahara, which is the outward conduct or daily practice.
So the deep inner belief and the outer actions have to support each other too.
Or like bhava, the inner feeling, the intention, and dravya, the physical substance or the act itself. In all these cases, the inner state and the outer expression, the knowing and the doing, they must be combined and mutually reinforcing for real spiritual growth.
All right, we've firmly established they're inseparable partners, both absolutely necessary. But now we have to face that tricky question of hierarchy. If you had to compare their intrinsic spiritual power, does one hold more weight? Which one is sort of the ultimate driving force?
The sources don't shy away from this, and they are quite clear, especially the Janasara text by Mahopayaya Yashvijay. While you absolutely need both for the journey,
Yes, got that part.
they argue for the definitive supremacy of jhana, of wisdom.
Okay, how do they make that case?
They use a really striking comparison. It's designed to show the massive difference in their inherent quality, their potential impact.
This is the sun and the firefly analogy.
That's the one. It's incredibly powerful. The text asks you to compare knowledge without action again, just as a thought experiment to gauge its value.
Right, isolating its nature.
And it likens that to the sun, Surya. Then it asks you to consider action without knowledge and likens that to a firefly, Agya.
Wow, okay, the difference in scale is immense.
Immediately obvious, isn't it? A firefly's light is tiny, intermittent, barely illuminates anything beyond its immediate vicinity, and only for a moment.
It's almost insignificant on a grand scale.
Exactly. Whereas the sun, it illuminates everything, the whole world, all the realms, constantly, powerfully, dependably. It's the source of light, vision, energy.
So placing the firefly's flicker next to the sun's blaze.
Makes the firefly's contribution seem negligible in comparison. The analogy forcefully argues that the intrinsic power, the reach, the fundamental importance of jhana is infinitely greater than that of mere undirected kriya.
And why is jhana considered so much more powerful? What does it provide that action alone lacks?
It provides the quality of the action. Specifically, it provides the right intention, the right feeling, what the texts call bhavana.
The inner state behind the outer act.
Precisely. Any spiritual practice, any kriya, only generates real spiritual force, real benefit, when it's fueled by the correct bhavana. And that correct bhavana can only arise from correct understanding, from jhana.
So action without the right intention is weak.
Structurally weak, yes. It lacks force. The sources give a couple of great analogies for this too, showing the power comes from within, not just the external act. First, the gun and bullet.
Okay, how does that work?
The bullet represents the action, the kriya. It's the thing that physically hits the target.
Makes sense.
But if you just take that bullet and throw it by hand, what happens?
Not much. It might sting someone, but it won't penetrate deeply. It lacks force.
Exactly. It's almost useless. The real power, the force that makes the bullet effective, comes from the explosion inside the gun. And that gun, that explosive force, represents the jhana and the bhavana.
So the knowledge and intention provide the power that makes the action effective.
Exponentially more effective. A small action performed with deep, informed conviction, jhana and bhavana, has far more impact than a huge action done mechanically or with poor intention. Kriya is the delivery mechanism, but jhana is the charge.
That's clear. What's the second analogy? The elephant and the fort gate.
Right. This one emphasizes the idea of applied force, or jerd. Historically, elephants were used to break down massive wooden fort gates.
Okay.
Now, the source asks, what actually breaks the gate? Is it the elephant's tusks? The tusks are the point of contact, yes. They represent the kriya, the physical act of hitting the gate.
But the tusks alone aren't strong enough for that.
No. What breaks the gate is the incredible, overwhelming strength, the jur, of the entire elephant pushing behind those tusks.
Ah, I see. The power source is the elephant's mass and effort, not just the pointy bits.
Exactly. And spiritually, the tusks are the external practices, the fasting, the rituals, the donations. The goal, remember, is nirjara, shedding karmas.
Right. Breaking down the gate of karma.
And that shedding, that nirjara, doesn't happen just because your tusks, your actions, touched the gate. It happens because of the force, the bhavana, the deep intention and understanding, jnana, pushing behind those actions. That's the elephant's strength that actually smashes the karmic barrier.
So the emphasis on jhana as the power source is overwhelming. Which leads us to a rather pointed critique the source material makes about the current state of affairs.
Yes, the speaker shifts to observe a trend over the last, say, 50 years, and it's quite a stark observation.
What's the trend?
Massive growth in kriya, in the outward forms of action. He gives concrete examples, donations, for instance. He says amounts that were unimaginable before crores, millions of rupees are now commonplace for religious events and projects.
Like the Chalopathology event mentioned or the Yucatan ceremonies.
Exactly. These large-scale, action-oriented, often expensive undertakings have flourished. The external activity is huge.
And it's not just donations, right? It's also impersonal austerity tap.
Fasting has also seen dramatic increases. An 8-day fast used to be a really major achievement. Now, the speaker observes, month-long fasts, masamana, and other intense austerities like siddhatap happen almost routinely, wholesale, as the text puts it.
So quantitatively, the amount of action, discipline, donation that Kriya has exploded.
Undeniably, the physical commitment is immense. But, and here's the critical, uncomfortable question the jhani raises.
Has the jhana kept pace?
Exactly. Has the wisdom, the deep scriptural understanding of the average follower, the Shravaka, developed alongside this explosion of action? Is the elephant getting stronger, or are we just putting bigger tusks on it?
And the assessment is not optimistic.
It's quite pessimistic, actually, the source states bluntly. Probably not. Instead of development in jhana, there might actually have been atapatana, a decline, a degeneration in real understanding.
That's a serious charge. A decline in knowledge despite an increase in practice.
It points to an imbalance. Many people are performing puja, giving up foods, fasting, all valuable kriya. But the text asks, how many are equally dedicated to studying? Why is religious school, pahashala, seen as something mainly for children?
Why are the adults who miss out studying now?
That's the core of the critique. The focus has shifted so much towards the external performance, the kriya, that the internal foundation, the jhana, which gives it power and meaning, might be weakening.
This naturally leads to a strong call for renewed effort in learning, for puartha directed towards knowledge. And the text counters the most common excuse for not studying.
I'm too old to learn.
Right.
How does it counter that?
With a very powerful, very humbling example, the speaker's own guru. This isn't just any teacher. It's described as a top-tier spiritual leader, 74 years old at the time of writing, lecturing to huge crowds, author of over 350 books.
Okay, someone incredibly accomplished and busy.
Incredibly. And yet this guru still makes the personal effort, the puartha, to memorize 3 new scriptural verses, 3 gathas, every single day.
Wow, 3 new verses a day at 74 with all those responsibilities.
It kind of demolishes the excuses, doesn't it? If someone at that level of attainment and responsibility still prioritizes daily learning, how can anyone else claim they're too old or too busy?
It's a direct challenge.
It is. And the speaker reinforces this from personal experience, too, saying at 50 that this whole idea that your memory fails and you can't study in old age is mostly just a mental block and excuse. He believes he could still memorize just as well as when he was young.
If he put his mind to it, yes. He argues that continuous effort, karartha, actually maintains and even develops your capacity for knowledge throughout life. You just have to exercise that mental muscle.
Okay, so effort is key. But what if someone makes a sincere effort? They really try to study, but they struggle. Maybe they aren't good at memorizing, for example. Is that effort wasted if they don't see the academic results?
This is where the story of Masatumuni comes in. It's such a profound teaching.
What happened with him?
Masatumuni spent 12 years trying to learn. His goal was just to memorize one very simple phrase. Matu. 2 short words.
12 years on 2 words. And could he do it?
No. After 12 years of dedicated effort, he still couldn't reliably memorize Matuwa. From a purely academic standpoint, you'd have to say his study was a complete failure.
That sounds incredibly frustrating.
It must have been, but here's the incredible part. The source reveals that even though he failed at the rote learning, the sheer intensity and sincerity of his 12-year effort, his puartha aimed solely at gaining jhana, generated such immense spiritual purification that he attained kevala jhana, omniscience.
He became fully enlightened just from the effort of trying to learn, even though he failed at the memorization.
Exactly. He reached a state where he didn't need to study scriptures anymore because he knew everything directly.
That's staggering. It completely redefines success in learning.
It does. It shows the supreme value is in the effort itself, the sincere striving for wisdom. That effort, that puartha towards jhana, is itself the most powerful form of kriya, transforming the soul even if the external academic goal isn't met. The intention and the struggle are what truly count.
Okay, so jhana is supreme in power, and the effort towards it is paramount. How does it translate into, like, the organizational structure? Who gets to make decisions? Who holds the real authority within the religious community or order?
This is where the discussion turns to the concept of nitha, which means something like fidelity, dedication, or even loyalty.
And the standard understanding is?
Usually it's understood as obedience to the religious commands, aja palan, following the rules, respecting the tradition.
Seems straightforward.
It does, but the speaker introduces a rather sharp critique here, a bitter truth, about how this concept sometimes gets, well, misused by the lay community.
Misused how?
He poses a challenging question directly to the listeners' community. When you organize a big religious festival, a Mahatsava, you definitely want the monks there. You seek their presence, their blessing, their niha.
Right, their participation lends legitimacy and sanctity.
Exactly. But the question is this genuine niha? Are you truly committed to doing only what the monks, guided by scripture, permit? Are you really following their aja? Or are you just using the monks as, in the text's very evocative phrase, shubha-nayakya, like decorative ornaments to make your event look more prestigious, while maybe ignoring their actual spiritual guidance if it interferes with the scale or the plans you already had?
Ouch. That's asking if the respect is genuine or just for show.
It's a very pointed critique. It suggests that true fidelity isn't just having monks present, it's submitting to the wisdom behind their guidance, even if it means scaling back the external kriya. That's the real test of whose authority you respect.
So how should authority work, according to the scriptures, especially among the monks themselves?
Yeah.
Conventionally, seniority matters, right?
Yes. In terms of day-to-day conduct, the Vyavahara, seniority based on the date of renunciation, Karitra Paraya, is usually the standard. The longest ordained monk gets precedence.
That seems logical based on experience.
It is logical for social order, but the scriptural truth, the underlying reality or hakikat, is presented as something quite different, almost radical.
Which is?
The scriptures state that ultimate niha, the real decisive authority, belongs only to the Gitartha.
The one who is truly knowledgeable in the scriptures, the expert.
Yes. Even if that knowledgeable monk is junior in terms of years since renunciation.
Whoa. So knowledge trumps seniority when it comes to actual decision-making authority.
Absolutely. It fundamentally flips the hierarchy based purely on time served.
Why? What's the justification for giving a potentially younger, less experienced monk that ultimate authority?
It comes back to that core concept of viveka discernment. The rationale is purely practical. Only the jnana, the Gitartha, possesses the deep understanding needed to distinguish between what is spiritually beneficial, sarar, and what isn't asar.
Only they can truly judge good from bad in complex situations.
Only they have the tools, derived from understanding the meaning, artha, of the scriptures, not just the words, to determine what should or shouldn't be done according to core principles, especially when facing new or difficult circumstances.
So when a critical decision, Nika, needs to be made about doctrine, about proper conduct in a tricky situation,
the jnani has to make the call, even if they are junior.
And this requires incredible humility from the senior monks, doesn't it?
Extraordinary humility. The text is clear. Seniors still receive all the outward signs of respect, the greetings, vandana, sitting in the front row, being named first. That's the social convention, the vyavahara.
Okay.
But when a substantive question arises, a matter requiring true scriptural judgment, those same seniors are expected to defer to the jnani. They should refer questions to the expert, follow their decision, and essentially set aside their own seniority for the sake of correct guidance.
Knowledge dictates the direction.
It's the ultimate arbiter, and this ties back directly to tailoring guidance to the individual's level, their kaka.
How so?
Because only the Gitartha, the expert, can properly assess someone's spiritual readiness and determine the right path, the right mix of knowledge and action for them. Therefore, only the Gitartha has the legitimate authority to give spiritual instruction, the dishana.
So the right to teach stems directly from deep knowledge.
It's an exclusive right based on competence. Knowledge isn't just power, it's the foundation of rightful spiritual authority.
And this isn't just a theoretical ideal, it's actually embedded in the core structure of the tradition. You mentioned the Panchakaramiya.
Yes, the 5 supreme beings, the central fetters of reverence. Think about who they are. 2 of those 5 roles are explicitly defined by their function related to knowledge.
Which ones?
The Akarya and the Upatiya.
And their roles are?
The Akarya's primary role is to teach the meaning, the artha, of the scriptures, to ensure correct interpretation and application. The Upatiya's primary role is to teach the text, the sutra itself, preserving the literal tradition accurately.
So 2 of the 5 highest positions are fundamentally about teaching and preserving knowledge.
Exactly. Their main job description is the gift of knowledge. It shows just how central jhana is institutionally. It's not an afterthought. It's a core pillar.
The commitment to acquiring jhana seems so absolute that the scriptures even allow for, well, some surprising flexibility in how one learns, even learning from someone flawed.
Yes, this is perhaps one of the most striking examples of how highly knowledge is prioritized. The texts actually permit a student to learn from a monk who might be sithilakari, meaning lapse in their own conduct may be quite flawed.
That seems really counterintuitive. Why would that be allowed?
There's only one condition. If that flawed monk possesses unique, essential knowledge that simply isn't available anywhere else, the need to acquire that vital jhana can, in this very specific circumstance, override the usual requirement to only associate with virtuous teachers.
But surely there are safeguards. You don't just ignore the teacher's flaws.
Absolutely not. The safeguards are strict. The student must not offer formal respect to this teacher. They must not live with them or become unduly close or imitate their flawed behavior.
So maintain distance and ethical separation.
Right. But you are allowed to go and study that specific piece of knowledge out of necessity. It demonstrates an almost extreme commitment. The preservation and transmission of unique wisdom is paramount. Even justifying interaction with someone whose actions, kriya, are imperfect, provided the student's own conduct remains pure.
That really underscores the value placed on knowledge. And there's one final point about the guru's own duty regarding the disciples' learning.
Yes, it shows that the pursuit of jhana shouldn't be hindered even by the teacher-student relationship itself.
What does it say?
It instructs that if a disciple has learned everything their current guru can teach them, and if that disciple clearly has the capacity and desire to learn even more, then the guru themselves has a duty to send that disciple to another guru, someone more knowledgeable, for further education.
So the guru shouldn't hold on to a promising student out of attachment or pride.
No, there should be no possessiveness. The guru's responsibility is to facilitate the disciples' maximum potential for gaining jhana, even if that means sending them elsewhere. It reinforces that the journey of knowledge is primary, transcending individual relationships. The entire system is geared towards fostering and advancing wisdom. #tag outro.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, the core message coming through from all these sources seems incredibly consistent, doesn't it?
It really does. Knowledge, jhana, and action kriya are fundamentally intertwined. You absolutely need both.
Like those 2 wheels of the chariot. Action provides the movement, but it's blind without the vision that wisdom provides.
And we saw it's not static. It's this dynamic loop. Understanding fuels better action, and practicing that action deepens the understanding. They constantly refine each other.
And this was a key point, when you look at their inherent nature, their intrinsic power.
Wisdom jhana is the sun. Action, kriya, without it, is just the firefly. Jhana provides that essential inner force, the bhavana, that makes any action spiritually potent. Without it, even grand actions lack real impact.
Which brings us back to that challenging observation about the present day, and maybe looking towards the future.
Yeah, the source material leaves us with a pretty stark thought. It mentions the traditional belief that Lord Mahavira's teachings, his dispensation, is meant to last for 21,000 years.
And we're only about 2,500 years in, so there's something like 18,500 years still to go.
A vast stretch of time. So the question that Johnny poses is stark. How will this tradition sustain itself over that immense period? What will keep it alive and vital?
And the answer from the texts is
unequivocal. It will sustain itself only on the basis of jhana, only through deep, accurate, living wisdom. The flurry of activity, the kriya, is important, yes, but it's the underlying knowledge that ensures long-term survival and integrity.
So that really puts the responsibility back on us, doesn't it? On you, the listener.
It does. Given that potential decline in deep knowledge that was mentioned, given the example of the guru still learning daily at 74.
The final question becomes very personal. What concrete step, what commitment of pururtha, of sincere effort are you going to take, starting today, to cultivate jhana?
Not just for your own benefit, although that's huge, but also for the health and continuity of the spiritual path itself. Because as we've seen, dedicating yourself to wisdom might be the most potent, most necessary form of action there is.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission here is, well, to take these often complex sources and really boil them down for you. Get to the essential principles, the finer points, and maybe some surprising facts so you can become genuinely well-informed.
And today we're diving into something quite profound, really. A philosophical look at knowledge itself, or as the texts we're exploring call it, Janan.
Yes, Janan. And this dive, it's really set up to challenge how you might normally think about learning, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, you probably think knowledge is something you find in a library, maybe stored in books, but these sources, they argue that this very common idea is, well, the first big hurdle, a kind of misconception.
A gram, they call it.
Precisely a Brahm. So we're going to try and pinpoint where knowledge actually resides. Then we'll look at its 5 different forms, and finally explore 3 really crucial levels or degrees of understanding that. Well, they determine if your knowledge helps you find liberation or just leads to more suffering.
That's a great way to frame it. Because, anyone listening likely wants that thorough, almost exhaustive understanding. So let's really get into it. Let's start right there with that fundamental challenge. Where does this spiritual knowledge actually truly reside? Okay, so let's unpack this core idea first. The common assumption, whether you're talking academics or just everyday thinking, is that knowledge is in books. It's in scriptures, recorded history, that sort of thing.
Right. That's the default.
But this philosophy we're looking at, it says it's just plain wrong, an error, a Brahm. So why is that initial thought incorrect?
Well, fundamentally, it's because it confuses the container with the content. It's mixing up the medium with the actual thing. The sources are very clear on this. Knowledge, or ajnan, is essentially a quality of the soul.
Atmanogan.
Exactly, Atmanogan. It's an inherent part of consciousness itself. It's a conscious quality. A book, though, however much we might revere it, it simply cannot possess knowledge.
And the reason it can't hold knowledge, that ties back to this concept of the book being jad, right? Can you maybe elaborate a bit on what jad means compared to the soul's qualities?
Certainly. Jad refers to anything that's inert, non-conscious, just physical matter. Think about it, anything that lacks awareness, consciousness, the ability to experience anything at all.
Like paper, ink?
Paper, ink, wood, stone, a chair. These are all jad. Now, a quality of the soul, like knowledge or consciousness itself or bliss, these are inherently conscious. Knowledge is, you could say, a manifestation of the soul's own awareness, its purity.
So if you put a book in front of a chair,
the chair gains nothing. The book can't know what's written in it. It's just physical stuff. So saying the book has knowledge is, well, it's that Brahm. It's mistakenly giving a conscious quality to something completely inert.
It seems so straightforward when you put it like that. Yet it really goes against how we're culturally taught to think, doesn't it? We treat some books almost like they are the knowledge.
It really does. And that immediately brings up a kind of paradox, something you listening have to wrestle with. If books and scriptures don't actually contain real knowledge, then why are they so revered?
Right. Why do we worship them? Sometimes it feels like even more than the actual living people who understand and embody that knowledge.
And this is where we need to bring in that philosophical idea of convention, or vyavahar.
Okay.
The scriptures are revered, quite rightly, because they play an incredibly important role. They are the medium. They are the cause, the instrument, the karan, or the nimit, as the texts say, through which the soul attains knowledge.
Ah, okay. So the worship isn't for the physical object itself, the paper and ink.
Yeah.
It's for its function, its role in helping us get there. So we venerate them conventionally, vyavarethingsfuli.
Yeah.
Is the danger then that we start confusing this conventional understanding, the vyavahar, with the absolute truth, the nishaya?
That is precisely the danger. Conventionally, yes, because the scriptures cause knowledge, we are allowed to refer to them as knowledge, and so we venerate them. It's a practical necessity in a way.
But the absolute truth remains.
The nishaya remains. The knowledge is in the consciousness that interacts with the text. It's not in the pages. And if you don't keep that distinction clear in your mind, well, your spiritual practice could end up becoming quite materialistic. You start valuing inert stuff over actual conscious realization.
That's a really powerful starting point.
Okay.
So knowledge, quality of the soul, not in the book. Now let's look at the different ways this quality actually shows up, because the sources give us this very traditional fivefold classification of John. Hashtag 2. The fivefold classification of knowledge.
Yeah, and this classification is really fundamental. It helps us move beyond just thinking knowledge equals reading. It shows the whole spectrum of how we can know things. From the most basic sense-based input all the way to pure, direct spiritual awareness.
Okay, so those 5 types are Matijan, Shrutjan, Avadijan, Manaparabhajnan, and the ultimate one, Kevalshan. Let's begin with the one we're using constantly every single moment we're awake. Matijan.
Matijanan. This is your sensory knowledge. empirical knowledge. It's the knowledge you get through the medium of your senses, the indriya and your mind. Now, the crucial thing here is this knowledge doesn't happen directly to the soul. It has to come through these physical pathways.
Can you give us some really concrete examples, just to make it crystal clear for everyone?
Sure. Think about when you bite into an apple. That immediate perception, crisp, sweet on your tongue, that's mati jnan.
Okay.
Or when you pick up a glass of ice water, that feeling of cold, the pressure, that's mati jnan too. Even just seeing colors like red versus yellow, or hearing a specific sound, a musical note. It all relies on the physical tools, the eyes, the ears. The soul perceives the world through these senses.
And connecting back to what we just discussed, it's vital to point out Mati Jnan doesn't need books either, right? It's about the soul processing interaction with the physical world.
Absolutely. Mati Jnan is worldly knowledge. It's gained through interacting with jad, with matter. Okay, so next is Shrut Jnan. This is the second type. This is scriptural or verbal knowledge. It's the knowledge you gain by reading or hearing letters and words. This is the only type that has a direct, albeit instrumental, link to the material world of books.
Right. Now, contrast that with the next three, the higher forms of knowledge.
Yeah.
Because they seem to operate on a completely different level.
They really do. We shift from knowledge that comes through external means to knowledge that arises directly internally. So we have avadichan, which is often translated as clairvoyance. It's a kind of limited, direct knowing of forms and matter, even at a distance. Then there's manapariyavajan. This is knowing the mental states, the thoughts of others, basically mind reading.
Wow.
And finally, the pinnacle, kevaljanan, omniscience, pure, complete, totally unobstructed knowledge of everything, all substances, all their forms, past, present, and future.
And these three, they happen to sakshat atman nejeteche, directly to the soul. I think it's really important to pause on where this kind of knowing comes from. It's not just random.
Not at all. These higher forms, they arise because of significant spiritual progress. It's due to the destruction, or at least suppression, of these karmic veils that normally obscure the soul's knowledge. Philosophically, this is called karmic shirapsham, or even complete kashaya, total destruction of those veils.
So they are pure spiritual manifestations.
Exactly. They require neither books nor the help of the senses, the indriya. They really demonstrate in the clearest way possible that knowledge is fundamentally a quality of the soul itself, not dependent on external physical tools.
Okay, but as soon as you introduce these five types, especially those higher three, you hit this fascinating paradox that the scriptures themselves point out, this idea of the mujjanan or muk knowledge. What's that about?
Ah, yes. This is subtle, but incredibly important. The texts state that all four types of jhanan, except for Shrut Jhanan, are, in their essence, muk. They are mute. They can't be directly communicated in their pure, realized form.
Wait, that's huge. If an omniscient being, a Keval Jnani, knows everything through Keval Jhanan, which is inherently mute,
Yeah.
how on earth do they teach anyone? How does that knowledge get out?
It has to be expressed through the medium of Shrut Jhanan. The Keval Jnani's perfect silent realization gets translated into the physical form of sound, words, letters, the Akshar Rupi form. The disciples then perceive that through their own Mati Jnan, hearing the words, and hopefully internalize it as their own Shrut Jnan, understanding the meaning.
Okay, so let me see if I've got this. Mati Jnan is sensory. The three highest Jnan are direct to soul, powerful, but inherently silent in their pure form.
Right.
Which leaves only Shrut Jnan, the verbal or textual knowledge, as the one that has a mechanism, even if it's just representational, to exist physically in things like books.
Exactly right. And recognizing that the book only holds the expression of knowledge, the words, it really forces us to take a much closer look at Shrut Jhanan itself. We need to dissect it further.
Right. And now we hit what feels like the core practical challenge for anyone on this path. Telling the difference between the physical form of scriptural knowledge and the actual spiritual understanding it's meant to spark. This distinction between Dravya Shrut and Bhaav Shrut.
Yes, this is where the rubber meets the road, spiritually speaking. Dravya Shrut refers to the material, the external medium. It's the spoken sounds or the written letters, the Akshar Rupi text itself.
The physical stuff.
The physical stuff. And to really grasp how material it is, just imagine picking up a book written in a language you don't know at all. Say complex classical Chinese characters, or maybe a script like Malayalam if you're unfamiliar with it. The Dravya Shrut, the physical letters are definitely there on the page.
But you get nothing from it.
Yeah.
No knowledge transfer happens because you can't decode it. It's still just patterns on paper to you.
Precisely. Those letters themselves aren't knowledge. They are merely the cause, the current, that could potentially lead to knowledge. They are what the texts call conventional Shrut, or Vyut Shrut, still fundamentally Jud, inert matter.
Okay, so that's Dravya Shrut. What about Bhaav Shrut?
Bhaav Shrut is the internal reality. It's the spiritual side. It's the genuine understanding, the realization that arises within our soul, our Atma, when we actually manage to read or hear those letters and grasp their meaning. That internal shift, that understanding, that is the true knowledge.
Okay, but here's the philosophical rub, isn't it? And this is where the sources seem to push us to prioritize. If you need the Dravya Shrut, the book, to even have a chance at generating the Bhaav Shrut, the realization, why is the realization considered so much more important or valuable? Isn't the cause essential?
It is essential, but the sources use a wonderfully simple, earthy analogy to make the point. Think about milk and grass. Milk comes from grass, right? A cow eats grass and produces milk. Without the grass, you don't get the milk. But would you ever argue that the grass is more valuable or more important than the milk it helps create?
No, never. We want the milk for what it provides, its nourishment. The grass is just the input.
Exactly. In the same way, the ultimate value is in the realization, the spiritual nourishment, the understanding that's the milk, not in the material cause, the grass, or in this case, the book. Dravya Shrut is the cause, the grass, but Bhaav Shrut is the fruit, the milk. And the fruit is always fundamentally superior to the cause that produced it.
But if that's true, and it makes logical sense, why do we see what the sources call this huge spiritual error, where people deeply revere the scriptures, the Dravya Shrut, but they seem to completely ignore or even disrespect the living knower, the Gitarth Mahatma, who actually holds the Bhaav Shrut?
That neglect, it really comes back to that initial confusion mixing up the container and the content. And it's a failure in applying the understanding. Look, the whole point of Dravya Shrut, the only point, is to generate Bhaav Shrut. Every spiritual decision, every action within the spiritual community ultimately relies on the living realization, the Bhaav Shrut, held by the wise. Knowledge stuck in a book is just inert potential. It's only the knowledge that's been internalized, understood, and lived by a knower that actually benefits anyone.
And this leads straight into that really difficult, sometimes contentious issue.
Yeah.
The book versus guru conflict. You know, when a living knower, someone deeply respected, says something that seems to contradict what's written down in a venerated text.
Yes.
The average person often gets scared. They think the book is unchanging. It must be right. The person could be mistaken. They instinctively trust the static words.
And that's a very understandable fear. We have to acknowledge that. The book does feel safer, more stable, because it doesn't change day to day. However, and this is critical, you have to remember the book is only Dravya Shrut. The knower holds the living, breathing Bhaav Shrut. Now, why is that living realization considered superior, even when there's an apparent conflict?
Well, I could push back there. The living knower is still human, right? Subject to making a mistake, even if they're venerable. The written word, potentially, has been preserved for centuries. Isn't that more reliable?
That's the counter-argument, and it highlights the hidden risk in relying solely on the Dravya Shrut. Firstly, who originally wrote or transcribed these texts? Often it was lay followers, Shraviks, or maybe even ascetics who themselves only possessed a fraction of the complete knowledge held by the truly enlightened, the omniscient ones. Secondly, the whole process of transmitting texts over centuries is inherently risky. Errors creep in. Mistakes happen during copying, during printing Mudran errors. A book is like a static photograph, potentially capturing an error or an incomplete thought, and it's susceptible to physical corruption over time.
So the knower, holding the realized truth, the Bhaav Shrut, might actually be correcting a mistake that entered the text generations ago through transcription or printing.
Precisely, or perhaps explaining a deeper context that the written word alone can't convey. Now, it's true, a knower could make a human error, and the sources say if you suspect that, you should raise it respectfully, but the fundamental principle remains. The living source of realization is generally superior. Bhaav Shrut is dynamic, it's alive, it can adapt to the seeker's needs. Dravya Shrut is static, limited, and potentially flawed by its material journey.
That makes sense?
And just to round out this point about the material letters, the Dravya Shrut itself is sometimes broken down further. You have Vyanjan Akshar, which is the spoken letter sound that tends to be fairly consistent. And then Samjna Akshar, the written symbol, which obviously changes drastically depending on the script, like the Gujarati, looks totally different from the Devanagari Adhwari, even if they represent the same sound. Both are just vehicles. Bhaav Shrut is the destination.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about what knowledge Jnan is. Now we need to look at its opposite, ignorance, or ajnan. And the sources make a really important distinction here. Ajnan isn't just one thing. It has two very different meanings, and understanding this difference is key because one type is relatively harmless, spiritually speaking, while the other is, well, catastrophic.
That's right. Ajnan can mean two things. First, it can simply mean the absence of knowledge, just not knowing something, a gap in your information.
Like a blank spot.
Exactly. The second meaning, though, is much more dangerous. It's inverse or contrary knowledge. Knowing something backwards or falsely. This is called viparajnan, or more commonly, mithidnan.
Okay, let's start with type 1 ajnan, just the absence of knowledge, the less harmful kind. The source gave the example of, say, not knowing the exact current population of enlightened beings in a place called Mahavidekshetra.
Right. That kind of not knowing, that information gap, it causes only minor harm spiritually. It might slightly prolong your journey through worldly existence, through sansar, but, and this is crucial, it doesn't have the power to completely block your path to liberation, to moksha.
So it's not a deal breaker.
Not at all. I mean, think about it. Only the truly omniscient, the Kavaljnanis, are completely free from this type of ignorance. Even most learned scholars or ascetics still only know an infinitesimal fraction of everything there is to know. We all operate with huge gaps in type 1 knowledge, and that's okay, spiritually speaking.
And the power of this idea is really brought home by that story, the anecdote about Masatushmuni. Can you share that one? It's quite telling.
Oh, yes, Masatushmuni. It's a famous story. He was an ascetic, deeply devoted, but apparently he had extremely limited intellectual capacity. His memory, his ability to retain information was very poor. So much so, the story goes, that the only two words he could reliably remember were Maz and Tush.
Just two words.
Just two words. So he suffered from a profound, almost total absence of scriptural knowledge. Type 1 ajnan. Yet, and here's the point, the sources tell us that because his devotion was pure, because he remained completely surrendered to the guidance of the true knowers, the jnanis, his lack of intellectual knowledge did not prevent his eventual liberation.
That's incredible. It really suggests that your spiritual alignment, your faith and surrender can be more powerful than just accumulating data. The lack of information didn't stop his progress towards moksha.
It confirms it beautifully. Type 1 ajnan, the knowledge gap, isn't fatal if it's combined with spiritual humility and what's called samyak darshan, right face or right perspective.
Okay, so that's the not knowing. Now let's tackle the really dangerous one. Type 2 ajnan. Inverse or contrary knowledge. Mithyanan. This is where the real spiritual danger lies.
This is the big one. This is the primary factor identified in these texts that actively increases your entanglement in sansar and blocks liberation. If type 1 is like having a blank cell in your spiritual spreadsheet, type 2 is like having the wrong formula entirely corrupting all your calculations.
And how does it do the harm? What's the mechanism?
It's fundamentally about misidentification. A person with this inverse knowledge, mithya janan, takes what is actually undesirable and harmful, heya, and believes it to be desirable and beneficial, upadeya, and vice versa. They mistake unrighteousness, adharm, for righteousness, dharm. Their entire value system is flipped.
And the real tragedy here, as you hinted at earlier, is that this person often genuinely believes they are knowledgeable.
Which leads to a kind of spiritual pride, right? A devastating spiritual arrogance.
Yes.
Yes. Because they're utterly convinced they have the truth, they actively reject the guidance of a genuine knower. They won't listen, they won't surrender their wrong views, they walk down a path that looks right to them, but because it's fundamentally based on an inversion of truth, it just leads them, and potentially others they influence, to bind heavy negative karma and deepen their suffering in the cycle of rebirth.
The sources actually take this idea further, almost simplifying the whole knowledge-ignorance equation down to the state of one's faith, defining knowledge itself by your underlying belief system.
Yes, it's like your core faith acts as a filter over everything you learn. For someone with right faith, a samyakriti, everything they come to know is considered jhanan, true knowledge. Why? Because their underlying perspective is aligned with reality, with the true nature of the soul and the path they process information correctly.
Okay, and conversely, for someone with wrong faith, a mithyatvi.
For a mithyatvi, everything they know, no matter how much information they accumulate, is ultimately classified as ajnan, ignorance, specifically that harmful type 2 ignorance.
That seems like the ultimate paradox of learning, doesn't it? A person with wrong faith, a mithyatvi, could study the most sacred texts, the words of enlightened beings, and somehow only gain ajnan from it. How does that work?
It works because they misuse or misinterpret the information. They fail to apply it for the true welfare of their soul. They might read profound truths, but twist them to justify their existing attachments or their pride, or use the knowledge merely for intellectual debate to show off, rather than for genuine purification. The mithyatvi, lacking the right perspective, turns even wisdom into a tool that reinforces their wrong state.
Whereas someone with right faith, a Samikriti, could read things that seem completely unrelated to spirituality, secular history, science, even scriptures from other traditions like the Ramayana or the Quran, and still counts as Jnan.
Yes, exactly, because their fundamental intention, their underlying orientation is correct. They instinctively process all information, regardless of its source, through the lens of what is truly beneficial, hita, for their own soul or the souls of others. Their right faith transforms neutral data, or even potentially misleading data, into something that aids their spiritual journey. It's a profound difference between just acquiring facts and actually utilizing them wisely.
That's a critical distinction. And just before we move on, there's a specific instruction for ascetics mentioned that really highlights the intellectual rigor expected here. Once an ascetic masters their own tradition scriptures, they are actually mandated, if capable and permitted, by their guru to study other philosophical systems.
Yes, this is often required for more advanced ascetics. It might seem counterintuitive why study other paths, but there are two key reasons given. First, they can't fully appreciate the unique truth and completeness of their own path until they genuinely understand the perspectives and perhaps the limitations or partial truths of other systems. It provides contrast and confirmation.
Makes sense. And the second reason?
The second is practical preparation. It equips them to engage in knowledgeable discussions or debates, vad or charcha, with followers of different doctrines. They need to be able to articulate why their path is considered complete and how others might differ, based on actual understanding, not just blind assertion. It's study for clarification and defense of the path, not for idle curiosity. #tag 5, the 3 degrees of knowledge comprehension.
Okay, so we've classified knowledge types and looked at the difference between knowledge and ignorance. Now we shift focus slightly from what you know to how deeply you know it. It's not just about having knowledge, it's about the intensity, the penetration of that knowledge into your being. The Shuddhashak texts apparently lay out this vital framework, 3 degrees of knowledge comprehension, based on intensity and how it translates to action.
Yes, and this framework is arguably the most practical part of our discussion today, because it gives you, the listener, a way to honestly assess where your own understanding actually lies. It's easy to think we're knowledgeable, but most of us, according to these texts, are stuck on the very first level.
All right, let's start there then. Level 1, Vishaya Pratibhas Jnan, which translates roughly to information.
Pretty much. Simple information. Basic awareness of an object or a concept's nature, just the raw data. The examples given are things like knowing a 2,000 rupee note has a face value of 2,000 rupees, or knowing a silver guinea is worth about 700 rupees, or even just being able to tell a real diamond from a fake one by looking at it. It's cognitive recognition identifying facts and attributes.
Okay, just knowing what something is. And the sources are surprisingly blunt about the spiritual value of this level, aren't they? They say it has essentially no value or use on the path to liberation, the Moksha marg.
That's right. It's dismissed as mere worldly knowledge, Dyavijan. It's the kind of knowledge that even someone considered spiritually unfit, an apavya, or someone with very heavy negative karma can easily acquire. Think of a highly successful, maybe ruthless businessman. He might possess incredibly detailed Type 1 knowledge about global markets, far exceeding an ascetic's knowledge in that area. But if that knowledge just stays at Type 1, it's spiritually inert. It might even be harmful if it fuels pride or greed.
So it's just data floating on the surface. If Type 1 is information, what's Type 2? This is Atma Parinadma Jnan, self-interest reflection.
Exactly. This is the crucial step up. This level requires not just knowing the information, Type 1, but immediately, almost instinctively, reflecting on how that thing or that potential action impacts your soul. What is the benefit or harm, the heta or ahita, it poses to your spiritual progress? It turns raw data into an internal, ongoing moral and spiritual assessment.
Let's use that Mohansal example again, the sweet treat. How does it play out across Type 1 and Type 2?
Okay. Type 1 is just recognizing it. Ah, that's Mahamthal. Simple identification.
Okay.
Type 2 kicks in immediately after. Wait, if I eat this, it's going to stir up attachment rug. It'll likely increase my faults, bind negative karma, and lead to suffering down the line. Therefore, eating this is ahita, harmful for my soul. You see the reflection.
Yes, connecting the object directly to its spiritual consequence for me. And the money example.
Same logic. Type 1, that's a silver guinea, worth 700 rupees. Type 2, If I were to take that, my sense of possession paragraph would increase. It would feed my greed, lob, and my craving trishna. Therefore, taking it is a hita.
So type 2 is the knowledge that generates spiritual caution, vigilance.
Precisely. And for someone who has achieved right faith, a samyakriti, this type 2 reflection must accompany every piece of knowledge they encounter constantly for their spiritual integrity to even be maintained. For ascetics, it's even stricter. This contemplation needs to be happening moment by moment. If they slip, if they stop reflecting, they're considered negligent in a state of pramad.
And the sources give a rather stark estimate of how common this level is.
They do. They suggest that maybe 90, even up to 99% of people, including many who read spiritual texts regularly, never really get past type 1. They accumulate the information, but they lack that constant, deep reflection on its implications for their soul.
Wow, 99%. That's sobering. Okay, so that brings us to the highest level, the ultimate aim. Type 3, Tattva Samvedanchanan. This is about conduct and realization.
This is where knowledge becomes inseparable from action. The intensity of the type 2 realization is so powerful, so profound, that it instantly translates into correct, effortless spiritual conduct. There's no gap between knowing what's right for the soul and doing it.
So back to the Mohanthal. If you know eating it binds karma, type 2, but you still hesitate, maybe fight the urge, and then eventually eat it, you're still stuck at type 2.
Exactly. You have the reflection, but not the conduct. The person who achieves type 3 jhanan regarding the Mohanthal, they see it. The type 2 realization, this is harmful, arises instantly, and they abandon the thought of eating it without struggle, without a second thought. The knowledge is the action. It has become embodied character, what's called charitita dhar.
And the sources are clear about who typically holds these different degrees.
Yes. Type 1, as we said, is open to anyone, even the spiritually unfit, the abhavya or mithyatvi. Type 2 knowledge, that crucial reflection, is considered exclusive to those who have attained right faith, the samyakriti. And type 3, where knowledge is conduct, is primarily found in those who embody perfect conduct, mainly advanced ascetics, sadhus, and perhaps partially in dedicated lay followers who practice significant self-restraint, the dishviradhar shravak.
So the real work after accepting the path is pushing yourself beyond just collecting information.
Absolutely. It's the constant effort to cultivate that type 2 reflection in every moment, and striving for the intensity where that reflection naturally flows into type 3 conduct. That's the core of the practice. #66. The practice of adoration, aradhana, and the misconception of worldly knowledge.
Okay, now we get to the practical application. How do we properly adore or practice aradhana of knowledge? We know only Shrut Jhanan has a physical form in books, but there are 4 other types, most of which are mute and direct to soul. So how do we venerate all 5?
That's the key question. Since we are meant to adore all 5 jhanan, and 4 of them don't reside in books, the veneration for those 4 mati, avadi, manapariyava, kathal must be directed towards the person who possesses that knowledge, towards the knower, the jhananis.
So it follows a general principle.
Exactly. The principle is you venerate any quality, gun, by venerating the one who embodies that quality, the gudavan. If you want to show respect for asceticism, tapnap, you don't worship a picture of fasting. You show respect to the ascetic, the tapasvi, who is actually doing it. Same applies to knowledge.
And given that in our current era, Keval Jnan and Manapariyava Jnan are said to be discontinued, Vichid and Avadi Jnan is extremely rare. Our practical focus for veneration really has to be on the living knowers of Mati and Shrut Jnan, right?
Correct. We must venerate the living realization, the bhavasha, embodied in the wise individuals around us. And the spiritual results, the karmic benefits, actually support this focus.
How so?
While the texts say that venerating the Dravya, the physical books and scriptures, respectfully, that does yield a positive result. It helps in suppressing the karma that obscures knowledge, the nanavaranadi karma notriyapsham. It's beneficial.
Okay.
But venerating the bhavasha, actively serving a true knower, supporting activities that spread right understanding, acting upon their guidance, that yields a much greater positive karmic effect, a far more significant suppression of obscuring karma. The benefit is exponentially higher when you connect with the living source.
That leads us towards the flip side, what we absolutely should not do. The sources are incredibly strong on this point, the sin of promoting inverse knowledge. They call promoting mithya jnan, or speaking contrary to the teachings of the enlightened Utsutra Bashan, the greatest sin of all. That's a really extreme statement. Why is it considered the worst offense?
It's considered the worst because it directly attacks the very means of liberation for others. When you promote mithya jnan, you're not just harming yourself. You are actively putting wrong instructions, false guidance into the minds of other seekers. You're teaching them to mistake a dharma for dharma. You could be preventing them from ever attaining right faith.
So you're essentially derailing their entire spiritual journey.
Potentially for an incredibly long time. Since the whole purpose of spiritual life is to end the cycle of birth and death, samsara, anything that actively works to prolong that cycle for others, perhaps indefinitely, well, that's seen as the ultimate act of spiritual violence or corruption. Hence, Uttaraprashan is ranked as the most severe sin.
Wow. Okay, and this brings us to a very modern, very common potential pitfall. The delusion that promoting secular worldly knowledge, the kind you get from schools and colleges, is somehow equivalent to true Jnan Aradhana, the adoration of spiritual knowledge.
Yes, this is probably one of the most challenging points for people today, especially those involved in education or philanthropy. The hard truth, according to these sources, is this. If that worldly knowledge, that Dravya, doesn't ultimately lead towards the soul's true welfare, but instead fosters things that are harmful, ahita, like excessive greed, materialism, cutthroat competition, attachment to worldly success, then from a spiritual perspective, it's actually categorized as ajnan, ignorance.
Type 2 ajnan, potentially?
It could easily feed into type 2, yes. And therefore, promoting that kind of knowledge without a balancing spiritual context is considered a harm, unrighteousness, not a virtuous act.
But hang on, many listeners might be involved in their communities, maybe helping start schools, funding scholarships. They genuinely believe they're doing good, helping kids get ahead. Is there absolutely no merit in that?
The sources offer a crucial distinction here, based entirely on intention. Let's say a religious community starts its own school, maybe a Jain school. If the primary intention behind it is not simply to pump kids full of worldly knowledge, type 1, to make them successful in worldly terms, but rather the main goal is to provide a safe, protected environment, to preserve their cultural and spiritual values, to shield them from potentially negative or culture-destroying influences they might encounter elsewhere, then the act can be justified from a religious standpoint.
So the justification is defensive, protective, not about promoting the worldly curriculum itself as inherently religious.
Exactly. The act is tolerated, even supported, because its aim is protection of spiritual potential. But the school's inherent function of teaching math, science, history, that worldly knowledge itself is still not considered dharma, a religious act in its own right.
That's a very fine but important distinction.
It is, because the ultimate measure of Jnan Aradhana has to be its spiritual goal. Think about why parents often encourage kids to perform knowledge adoration rituals. Frequently, the underlying hope is worldly. Get good grades, get into a top university, become a successful doctor, engineer, accountant. They're seeking the growth of Dravya,
which is type 1 knowledge.
Mostly type 1, yes. True Jnan Aradhana, according to these texts, must be performed with only one intention: to attain the knowledge that makes this human life successful in a spiritual sense, the knowledge that helps you progress on the path to liberation, the Moksha marg. The goal is the purification of the soul, not just success in the material world. #outro.
So wrapping this all up, this deep dive really forces us, I think, to completely reevaluate what we mean by knowledge. We've seen it's not just stuff in books, it's an inherent conscious quality of your soul.
Right. And the physical medium, the book, the Dravya, is always secondary to the actual realization, the Bhaav Shrut. The living truth within the knower is superior. And the quality of your knowledge, whether it's truly Jnan or actually Ajnan, depends entirely on your underlying faith and intention. Just knowing facts isn't the point. Knowing them with the right perspective, the Samyak perspective, is everything.
And understanding that critical difference between type 1 information and type 2 reflection, constantly asking, how does this affect my soul? That seems like the single biggest practical step anyone can take away from this.
Absolutely. And that leads to the final, maybe provocative challenge for you, the listener, building on those 3 degrees. You now understand that worldly info is type 1, that spiritual reflection creating vigilance is type 2. And that knowledge-compelling immediate right action is type 3.
So the question becomes...
The question you should constantly ask yourself in every situation is, where does my knowledge usually stop? Am I just collecting endless type 1 data? Or is my realization intense enough, consistent enough to actually show up as type 3 conduct? Honestly assessing that. That might be the truest form of Jnan Aradhana you can practice.